as kind of a fun place to start because I'm going to try to make it my only question where I do the thing where the character says the name of the movie in the dialogue. You've talked to a lot of chefs without restaurants. For those of us that grew up in an industry where long-standing sustainable restaurants were the pinnacle of success for a chef. How do these chefs that you've spoken with end up defining success for themselves? And please use specific examples if any come to mind from what you've perceived.
I think, at some point, really doing what you want to do on your own terms. I don't think working in a restaurant is often on your own terms. Sometimes, even if you own it, because you have other investors and you have to kind of appease a number of people. I think it's not really truly until you kind of strike out and do your own thing, like your really own thing, that you're successful. A lot of people seem to be successful. I would say someone like Matthew Jennings, who was on my podcast, someone who has won James Beard Awards, or I think he was nominated for James Beard Awards, has won things like Koshan 555, has a cookbook, had a restaurant in Boston with Acclaim, and then he seemingly walks away from it all to move from Boston to Vermont to like live on a farm, and is now working for a grocery store, like a Healthy Living Market, like consulting for them. And from the outside, you kind of think like, wow, someone who had it all, who kind of like walked away. But I think, talking to a guy like him, he wasn't happy. He was physically unhealthy. I think he was mentally unhealthy and just needed to step away from that whole restaurant industry thing. And that's the common theme, I think, of what I'm hearing from people on my podcast. A lot of them are, household names within the chef community, and they're kind of blazing their own path. And many of them did start in the traditional restaurant environment, but have kind of figured out that's not where they want to be.
The fascinating thing about that identifier, chefs without restaurants, is that we all start there, right? For the most part, barring someone who may or may not like inherit some sort of restaurant empire from their parents or something. But as you gain experience and you build your repertoire and you feel more confident and you grow your network and you identify opportunities, whether it's in a certain city or in a certain type of cuisine, what are you noticing as reasons that people are reconsidering restaurants as an option and thinking that is it a symptom of the times, like there's just more viable business opportunities available, or it's like people are remixing things in this new way? Like, what are you noticing on that front?
I think all of the above. The restaurant industry is tough. It's something I never really wanted to be a part of. When you talk about things like work-life balance, getting, paid what you're worth, if you went to culinary school, how much it cost versus what you are making out of there. And just, kind of like all the stuff that comes along with it, the long days, the working every holiday, all that kind of stuff. It's like, is there a way that I can go and make the food that I want to make, feel fulfilled, still have time with my friends and family, still, maybe have some money or benefits or something, and figuring that out. And it just seems like there's so many more options. And I think a lot of them were around before. I mean, I'm sure there have been research chefs for decades, but it wasn't something people necessarily went to school to get into. I mean, how many years have, companies like flavor companies or spice companies been in existence or things like that? But you weren't presented that as an option. When I went to culinary school, my idea was that I was going to come out and either be an executive chef right away, because that's what I thought, and probably run my own restaurant at some points. And now I think there are definitely, I think, I mean, kids don't even want to do that. They just want to go straight to being like a food content creator or YouTuber, or, I talk to a lot of people who are personal chefs. Like, a lot of them don't have any professional experience. They've never worked in a restaurant at all, never went to culinary school, and are essentially self-taught, and they just want to go cook in people's homes. And, that's fine too.
Would it be accurate to say that you could, before it was either chase the path, in my mind, at least when I was like just starting, the two opportunities that had the most well-defined track record of success to get clout was like get a show on TV or do the restaurant thing. And then there was, like you said, there was all these other options. You could do R&D, you could go grocery, you could go private chef, you can go catering, you can do all these other sorts of things. But now, because of all of these new opportunities, you can get the clout with this other big massive pile of opportunities. Would you say that that's accurate, and that's part of the reason? Because I think that there's this sense of self branding, and there's we can talk about ego if you want, but I think that those little internal things can be satisfied now with pursuing all these sorts of other things. And so it's kind of like the path that I laid out first, that get a TV deal or get a restaurant isn't the only way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big things I talk a lot about with people is the whole imposter syndrome thing, right? I think a lot of it is just getting over what is a chef, and to yourself, what does it mean to be a chef? I think so many of us are tied up in our profession. Like you meet someone and the first thing they say is like, it's like, oh, nice to meet you. What do you do? Right. And then you say, I'm a chef, I'm a photographer, I'm a lawyer. And we really self-identify as our career. So what does that mean? I think a lot of people really want to make sure if they say I'm a chef that they are a chef. And what does that mean? I actually was just on a panel an hour ago with a lot of other culinarians, and the topic was, what is a chef? Like, what does it mean to be a chef? And I'm someone who went to culinary school for 4 years. I went through the American Culinary Federation. I only got certified at the sous chef level, but I felt like I was a chef. I'd been given the title of executive chef. And, I was very protective of that. When I decided I wanted to be a personal chef, I joined the Personal Chefs Association, and you go in this classroom and they say, well, as far as marketing, buy yourself a chef jacket, put it on, and go grocery shopping. And when someone stops you in the store and says, where do you work and what do you do? Tell them I'm a chef. And I was offended. I was kind of like, wow, I paid my dues. I spent $100,000 to go to culinary school. I have the training. And this, woman who's a stay-at-home mom can also call herself a chef. And I think that's, in a sense, gatekeeping, or, whether it's a cognitive bias of like, because this is how I did it to become a chef, then no one else can. And it took me a lot of time to kind of overcome that and say, well, there are a lot of paths. And yes, while I did X, Y, and Z and consider myself a chef, like maybe other people are allowed to call themselves a chef as well. And it doesn't hurt anyone, right? Like if you are a stay-at-home mom who's never cooked anywhere and you want to start a personal chef business, by you calling yourself a chef and you live across the country, you're not taking anything away from me. And I think that's the hard thing, is people really want to be protective of this thing. And I think they just need to let it go.
As you think back, and this is me taking advantage of the fact that I have a podcast host with the mics reversed, right? Do any episodes come to mind, or specific takeaways from guests that you've spoken with that you've really taken to heart and either adopted them as a mental model or incorporated them in how you work or how you cook or how you approach conversations, or even maybe made you reconsider what you're doing a little bit differently?
I take a little bit from all of them. I think just kind of chefs who are kind of becoming comfortable in who they are. And I go back to Matt Jennings again, and maybe because I always feel like he's almost been like a mentor. Like he's someone I've personally known for a decade. I'm from Massachusetts. He had a restaurant there. I've cooked, I've eaten in his restaurant a number of times, but also we had an issue with weight similarly where, like he was overweight and unhealthy. I was too. We both lost a bunch of weight at the same kind of time period, but just like being happy, finding what makes you mentally happy. I think there's a lot in this industry, like you're chasing accolades. Now, I've never worked in restaurants, but you're always chasing something like, can I get written up in this magazine or this newspaper? And, if I don't, am I good enough? And I think at some point you just have to say, like, it doesn't matter. Enough is enough. So, I really admire those people who've kind of come to terms with who they are, what they do, and just don't really kind of care about if that stuff comes along with it.
It's one of the fascinating pieces of our time, is that you can see these conversations between mentor and mentee recorded like this. And like I'm just excited to see this potentially result in people being able to actually get excited about being mentored. And I'm saying that from the lens of like, I had a chef that I worked for in Norway, and I went back to Norway 2 Decembers ago, and I bullied him into having a conversation with me on the podcast. And we got to the end of the conversation, and he said something along the lines of like, I'm sorry I was such a dick to you. And it was recorded. It's like, I don't know, like, and I'm just not from a sense of like I wanted that from a you know it's so satisfying to hear him say that kind of thing, but it's like, can that encourage more people to be like, oh yeah, like, because when you're working in a restaurant or when you're working for another chef or with your specific team, the blinders come on and that's all you see and that's all you think of from the perspective of like, this is the dynamic between sous chef and chef de partie, or this is how the executive chef talks to prep cooks. But as we're putting out these conversations, I hope that like that's certainly a goal of mine. I don't know if you have anything to speak to of that, but it's interesting to
Well,
hear you say that.
and I also think that, it's hard not to be envious of people sometimes, like as before I even started Chefs Without Restaurants, as I was like doing more food writing and stuff, like I pitched to Plate Magazine a bunch of times and they kind of responded to me and said like, well, we really focus on restaurants and restaurant chefs. And like, you're like, okay, I get that. But now you see guys like Ray DeLucci and Line Cook Thoughts, who's like writing for them every month, and people like Amethyst Ganaway. And these are people I love, like been on my podcast, we've talked,
Yep.
but like it would I could very easily say like, what the heck? Like I pitched them over and over and they kind of rejected me because I wasn't a restaurant chef. But now these, younger chefs who also don't have restaurants are getting the opportunity. Like, why them, not me? Right. And I genuinely feel happy for them. Like I give them all credit. And I love to see their work, because I think it's time for a lot of these publications to finally recognize that there are chefs who are working outside of a traditional restaurant setting. But, that's the kind of stuff that I think you have to build up to, where it's just like, just because someone else is getting something doesn't necessarily take anything away from you. And I think that's a big ego thing.
I think that it's also